Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach, and we're continuing our conversations on the different types of breaking mechanics in jiu-jitsu. If you haven't listened to the previous ones that we did on the 3-joint rule, on linear breaks, and on rotational breaks, I would definitely recommend listening to those before this, so I will put links to those in the show notes to make it easy if you haven't already. Now, with all of that said, this time, we are going to talk about slicers. Slicers are a really interesting submission. They work a bit differently from the ones that we've talked about so far. When you are doing a linear break on an opponent like an arm bar or a knee bar, or when you are doing a rotational break like a kimura or a heel hook, what you're trying to do is attack the joint. You're attacking the soft tissue between the bones because that's more efficient than trying to attack a hard structure like a bone. A slicer is a bit different because with a slicer, you actually can attack the bone as well as the soft tissue surrounding it. So unlike the other moves which we've described as breaks I mentioned in the earlier episode, things like kimuras, arm bars, things that attack the joints, they're not technically breaks, they're more tearing submissions than they are breaking anything. The slicer is a bit different. The slicer can target the bones with the intent to break them. When you put someone into a calf slicer or a bicep slicer, there is the chance that you will snap the bone. However, it is probably more likely that you are going to damage the soft tissue around it, such as the bicep or the calf, hence the name bicep slicer, calf slicer. Human bones are very hard. They're harder than concrete, so it's really hard to just break a human bone. Tearing the soft tissue is probably going to be more successful. So when you go for a bicep or calf slicer, you're not just trying to break something. Often you're trying to attack the muscle tissue that surrounds the bone. And the way I like to think of how you do that is if you've got a straight stick-like object, like a bone, I mean, how would you break a stick if you were a kid? You know, I used to do this when I was a kid. I would put the stick on the ground, I would prop up both ends against something, and I would just kick it right down the middle to break it. That's basically the idea behind what a slicer is doing. You're putting force and pressure against the bone and the tissue around it with the intention of either tearing the muscle tissue or breaking the bone. Now, much like how when you are trying to break a stick, you need to prop up and secure both ends of the stick, with a submission like a slicer, you have to do the same. Like with any of the other limb submissions we talked about, you need to immobilize the joint if you want to break something. The difference here, though, is unlike when you are a kid trying to break a stick, you can't just prop up someone's shin and then just kick it with your foot and try to break it directly. In jiu-jitsu, you need to find a way to control them and hold them in position. Most slicers that you see will involve taking the limb, whether it be the arm or the leg, and kind of folding it up. And that makes it very hard for people to escape. When you fold up someone's arm like that, it really immobilizes their middle joint, their elbow or their knee, and it also makes it easier for you to latch onto their torso so you can immobilize the connecting joint like the shoulder or the hip. Think of the bicep slicer. Where you often see this is in an armbar type situation, and often the reason it comes up there is because if the person is trying to defend the armbar by clasping their hands together, they're putting themselves in a slicer position. Same thing with calf slicers. You fold someone's leg over, and by doing so, you immobilize much of the joint movement around it. The mechanics behind slicers kind of work like a nutcracker. I'm talking about those metal ones that you can hold in one hand. You put a nut like a walnut in the middle, you squeeze both ends of the nutcracker, and the nut explodes. That happens because the thing in the middle is softer than the thing on the outside, right? The nut is softer than the metal that the nutcracker is made out of. Flip that around, if that walnut inside the nutcracker were metal, and the nutcracker was made of something easier to break, If you squeeze that nutcracker, you're probably going to break it before you break the nut. So it comes down to which substance is harder a lot of the time. And that's part of the reasons why slicers work, is because you're often taking one of your bones, putting it in the crook of their elbow or their knee, and then compressing their limb down like a nutcracker. So often you will see the person's limb folded over like the nutcracker, and your bone in the middle is the nut. And again, when you squeeze, what you're trying to do is you're using the bone in your leg or your arm to put pressure on the soft tissue, and that's how you get the tap. All of this raises the question of why we don't see a lot of slicers. And when you don't see a submission often, it can lead you to think that maybe there's something wrong with it, and that maybe it's low percentage and people just don't use it because they don't get good success with it. Maybe that's true, but I think in the case of slicers, this is a good example of where the way we have defined the rules of the game may have changed the behavior of the game. Under IBJJF rules, you can't do slicers until you're a brown belt. And what this means is that a lot of grapplers won't even really start training with these until they're brown belt. And as a result, because these things are considered an advanced technique, they can get some dogma around them. People can look at them as being perhaps dangerous, even if it's arguable that they're any worse than anything else you could be doing to injure someone. So I think with slicers, you could make the argument that the reason we don't see them very often is because the IBJJF rule set makes it less likely that people will be training them much. And if people aren't training these things actively, we don't get to see good players build games around them. We don't get to see other good players learn to defend against that game and optimize how we defend against that submission. So maybe we just have low-tech slicers. Maybe there is a better way to do a slicer that we just haven't discovered yet. At CJI this year, Joseph Chen, my son, he was submitted via a slicer. So I think there's a lot of merit to these, and I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see the evolution of these and maybe see more slicers at a high level. That all remains to be seen though. For now, we'll be doing these every week, these mini episodes. Next time, we're going to be tying up the discussion of joint submissions by talking about hybrid breaks, where you start combining these mechanics. And then after that, we're going to have a lot of fun stuff too. As always, I really appreciate everyone checking out our material, all of our stuff, tons of free stuff, and of course, BJJ Mental Models Premium lives at bjjmentalmodels.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. Thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you soon.